I had just finished my studies at college in New York and landed a great job in the city. Everything felt like it was falling into place. The city was full of energy, and I couldn't wait to start my new chapter. But there was one thing that always stood out near my office. Across the street was a building everyone referred to as the haunted building. It wasn't very old, just unfinished, but everyone in the city talked about it. They said no one who ever went into the building alone came back the same, and some even said people went missing altogether. Now, I'm not the superstitious type. I thought it was all just talk, but my friends, they were all over it. One evening, after work, they dared me to go up to the rooftop of the haunted building and come back. Laughing it off, I agreed. After all, what's the worst that could happen? I made my way over to the building around 8 p.m. that evening. The air was cool, and the building looked like a shadow in the streetlight. I went up the stairs, shaking my head at how silly the whole thing seemed. When I reached the roof, I took a few selfies, posted them on Instagram and Facebook, and admired the view. Everything felt perfectly normal. But when I started heading back down, something felt wrong. As I reached the first floor, I saw a child sitting by the stairs, his face buried in his knees, crying softly. I approached the child and asked, "Hey, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" The child didn't respond. He just kept crying, not even looking up. I tried to comfort him, but no matter what I said, he wouldn't speak. I was about to leave when I realized the child didn't move. I quickly decided to get out of there, but as I reached the next floor, there it was again. The same child, sitting in the same spot, crying. That's when it hit me. Something was seriously wrong. My heart started racing, and I rushed down the stairs, bursting out onto the street. But just before I left the building, I heard the child's eerie laughter echoing from behind me. Back at my apartment, my head was pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling of someone else being there. As I rubbed my temples, it felt like someone else's hands were on my head too. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. I turned to face the darkness in my room. The door to my living room was wide open, and standing right in front of my bedroom door was the child, staring at me. I screamed, "Who are you? Why are you following me?" But as soon as I shouted, the child disappeared into the darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating, and the loud ticking of the clock seemed to fill the room. No matter what I did, the ticking wouldn't stop. In a panic, I called my boyfriend, Jake, crying uncontrollably, telling him everything that happened. He didn't believe me. He laughed it off, saying, "Come on, it's just a ghost trying to get attention. It's probably just some prank." I insisted something wasn't right, so Jake rushed over to comfort me. "Don't worry," he said. "It's just some harmless prank. I'm sure it's nothing." He took me back to his apartment to calm down. When we arrived, the security guard at Jake's building greeted us. He looked at me and asked, "Hey, who's this kid with you?" I froze. "What?" I asked. Jake laughed. "Oh, don't worry about it. That's just a kid who hangs around at night. He's harmless." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I went along with Jake's light-hearted attitude. We took the elevator up to his apartment, but when it stopped at the 7th floor instead of the 6th, I felt uneasy. It was just for a moment, but it was enough to send a wave of dread through me. When we reached the 6th floor, we were about to head inside when the elevator doors suddenly opened slightly. I glanced back and saw no one inside, but I could hear a voice from within, repeating, "Please close the door. Please close the door." Suddenly, the door clicked shut, and there, standing in the elevator, was the same child. I screamed, but Jake quickly grabbed me, annoyed. "Not in my building, come on. Don't make a scene." That night, as I tried to sleep beside Jake, I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. Jake was sound asleep, but as I stepped into the bathroom, I felt a strange presence. I could feel something else in the room with me. When I turned, I saw the child standing in the bathroom, just staring at me. I didn't scream. Instead, I slammed the bathroom doors shut and ran back to Jake's room. But when I opened the door, I froze again. The child was sitting beside the bed, crying, and Jake was there too, his head buried in his knees. I bolted out of the room, grabbing Jake's hand and dragging him with me. We ran downstairs to tell the security guard, but when we arrived, there was no sign of Jake or the child. I searched the building, but they were nowhere to be found. Then I looked outside, and my heart stopped. On the roof of the haunted building, I saw someone standing there. My phone rang, and it was Jake. He was laughing hysterically on the other end, saying, "You really thought I'd leave you hanging? It was just a prank. You're way too scared." I couldn't respond. "You think this is a prank?" I shouted. "Then tell me who that kid was. The one I saw on the stairs? How did he get into my room?" There was silence on the other end. "What kid?" Jake finally asked, sounding confused. "Are you seriously scared of some random kid? You're overthinking it." I couldn't answer him. I didn't know what was real anymore. Growing up in rural Iowa, we were surrounded by cornfields, vast, endless seas of green and gold that stretched beyond the horizon. They were beautiful in the daytime, a staple of life in our town. Wind howling, rustling intensifies, an eerie whistle in the distance. But when dusk fell, those same fields became something else entirely. Shadows stretched long between the stalks, and the wind whispered through the leaves in a way that never quite sounded natural. We all grew up hearing stories about things lurking in the corn, but no one ever spoke too much about them. Maybe because deep down, we all knew they weren't just stories. It was the summer I turned 13 when my older brother, Mark, dared me to walk to the old scarecrow past our property line. We had always been warned not to go beyond the fence that marked the end of our land, but Mark was 17 and full of bravado, and I was desperate to prove I wasn't just a kid anymore. So, just as the sun was dipping below the fields, I set off. The path to the scarecrow wasn't long, maybe 200 yards from where we stood, but the second I stepped between the rows of corn, I felt the air change. It was stifling, thick with the scent of earth and something else, something sour, like old water left too long in a bucket. The husks whispered against each other, but underneath that sound, I swore I could hear something else. I tried to ignore it, pressing forward, my heart hammering. I could see the scarecrow ahead, its rotting burlap face twisted in a way that made it seem like it was watching me. But just as I got close, I saw them. 2 kids. Twins. They stood perfectly still between the stalks, their faces impossibly pale in the dim light. They were dressed in matching blue overalls, their hands hanging at their sides. Their eyes, God, their eyes, were wrong. Too big, too dark, too empty. And then I realized something that sent ice through my veins. Their feet weren't touching the ground. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there frozen in place. But I couldn't move. They stared at me, and then they smiled. A slow, unnatural stretch of their lips, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect, like porcelain dolls. My legs finally obeyed, and I turned, bolting back through the corn. The rustling sound now deafening, like something was chasing me, closing in fast. I broke through the rows, stumbling onto the dirt path near our house, gasping for breath. That night I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the image of those twins. The way they stood so still. The way they smiled. Then I heard it. At first, it was soft, barely more than a whisper carried on the wind. But it grew louder. Then came the tapping. Just 3 soft knocks against my window. Deliberate. Slow. I squeezed my eyes shut. Maybe if I didn't look, it would go away. Maybe I had imagined it. But then, the window slid open. I turned my head slowly, and there, peering through the open window, were the twins. Their pale faces barely illuminated by the moonlight, their dark eyes staring. And they were still smiling. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. I don't remember falling asleep. The next thing I knew, the sun was rising, golden light spilling over the fields. It almost made me believe none of it had happened. Almost. At breakfast, I was quiet. Mark noticed. "You look like hell." Dad didn't say anything, just sipped his coffee, but after a while, he finally spoke. "You saw them again, didn't you?" I nodded. He sighed, setting his mug down. "They come back every summer." "Looking for what?" I whispered. "Each year, someone disappears." A sick feeling settled in my stomach. I never went near that scarecrow again. By the end of the summer, Old Man Wilkins from down the road vanished without a trace. Search parties combed through the cornfields for weeks, but they never found a body. The next year, it was someone else. And every summer, when the air turned thick and the days grew long, I heard the laughter outside my window. Boston winters were ruthless. Snow piled up on the sidewalks, turning to dirty slush under the feet of 1,000 commuters. The cold cut through my layers like a blade, and the only thing worse than being outside was going home to my basement apartment. It was cheap, dirt cheap for Boston. That should have been my first red flag. The place was old, damp, and had a perpetual earthy smell, like something buried. The landlord, Mr. Burke, was an elderly man with a hunched back and a raspy voice. He barely spoke to me when I signed the lease. Just handed me the keys with a nod and a warning about the plumbing. The first few weeks, I chalked up the unease to the new environment. I had lived in dorms before, but this was my first time alone. The basement was quiet, the silence pressing. Sometimes, at night, I swore I could hear faint whispering, but I blamed the pipes, the neighbors upstairs, or my own imagination. Then, there it was again. That sounded like a voice calling my name. Then I saw her. I was watching TV, the screen black between episodes. In the reflection, I caught a glimpse of someone, standing in the doorway behind me. A small figure, a girl in a white dress. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around. The doorway was empty. The next few days, more things happened. I'd wake up to find my closet doors wide open, though I always shut them before bed. My furniture would be slightly out of place. A chair moved a few inches, a book knocked off the shelf. Once, my kitchen faucet was running full blast when I came home, even though I was sure I had turned it off that morning. Then the whispering got louder. No longer muffled and distant, but right by my ear. "Get out." The words were cold, biting. My heart raced, my skin prickled. One night, I woke up with a crushing weight on my chest. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I couldn't move. My eyes darted around the dark room, then stopped. There she was. A girl, maybe 8 or 9, sitting on my chest. Her white dress was stained. Her dark hair hung in stringy, damp strands over her face. The breath of her presence was thick, as if the air was being sucked out of the room. Her eyes, black voids, stared straight into mine. Her small hands pressed down on me, and I felt the air leave my lungs. I tried to scream, to push her off, but my arms wouldn't respond. My head spun. The room swayed. The sound of my heartbeat thudded in my ears, loud and frantic. I couldn't take it. Then, as suddenly as it started, it was over. She was gone. I sat up, gasping, my hands clutching my chest. The room was empty, but the air was heavy, thick with something unseen. I couldn't stay there another night. The next morning, I went straight to Mr. Burke. He was sitting in his office, sipping coffee from a stained mug. When I mentioned the girl, the color drained from his face. The scrape of his mug against the saucer was louder than it should have been. "There was a girl," he said after a long pause. "She lived down there once. But she never left." I swallowed hard. "What happened to her?" Mr. Burke sighed, rubbing his temples. The creak of his chair echoed in the quiet room. "Years ago, back when this place was a boarding house, a family lived in that basement unit. The little girl, Clara, she was sick. Weak. Never went outside much. Then one winter she just disappeared." "Disappeared?" I echoed. "They say her father lost his temper. That one night, in the dead of winter, he buried her." His voice cracked. "Right there. In the basement." My stomach churned. I packed my things that same day. I didn't even bother getting my security deposit back. As I hauled my last box up the stairs, I felt a chill behind me. I turned, just for a second. She was there. In the doorway. Watching. I left the lights on as I walked away, but I knew they wouldn't make a difference. Some things stay in the dark, no matter what you do. I used to work the night shift at a rural Texas gas station off Route 85. It was the kind of place where nothing much happened, just the hum of the overhead fluorescents, and the occasional trucker pulling in for gas or a quick coffee. Most of the time, I was alone, watching the highway stretch into the dark nothingness. That night was different. It was a little past 2 a.m. when the door chimed. I looked up, expecting to see a trucker or some tired traveler, but instead, a boy stood in the doorway. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, barefoot, wearing pajama bottoms and a dirty white t-shirt. His hair was unkempt, and his face was smudged with dirt. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me with eyes that were too dark, too knowing for a child his age. I set my coffee down and stepped around the counter. "Hey, buddy. Are you lost?" The boy blinked slowly, then said, almost in a whisper, "They don't want me anymore." A chill ran down my spine. Something about the way he said it felt wrong. I glanced outside. The gas station was surrounded by nothing but empty road and fields of dry, dead grass. No car. No parents. Just the open stretch of Route 85. "Who doesn't want you anymore?" I asked. The boy's lips trembled as if he wanted to say something else. But then, from behind me, the payphone beside the register let out a shrill ring. The sound made me jump. That phone never rang. I hesitated, glancing between the boy and the phone before stepping back to answer it. "Hello?" A panicked voice on the other end gasped, breathless and urgent. "If you see a little boy, don't let him in. He's not a child." A cold weight settled in my gut. I turned back toward the doorway. The boy was gone. But the doors had never opened. I stepped around the counter, my pulse hammering in my throat. The only sound was the soft hum of the coolers and the buzzing overhead lights. The boy had just been there. How could he have vanished so quickly? I moved to the door, pushing it open to peer outside. Nothing but the highway stretching in both directions, bathed in the eerie glow of the gas station's lights. The air was still, unnaturally quiet. I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned. The boy was standing at the far end of the aisle, staring at me from between the shelves of snacks and canned goods. His dark eyes were locked onto mine, and for the first time, I noticed something else. His pupils weren't normal. They were too large, swallowing almost all of the whites of his eyes. Like a void. My breath hitched. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The boy tilted his head, his lips twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I want to go home." A surge of unease rolled through me. "Where's home?" His gaze flickered toward the door, then back to me. "Not here." I took a step forward, and the overhead light flickered. For a split second, The entire store was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back, the boy was standing right in front of me. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. He was too close, his small frame unmoving. He smelled of damp earth and something metallic, something sharp. The payphone rang again. My hands were shaking as I backed away, never taking my eyes off the boy. I reached for the receiver with trembling fingers. The same voice, now more urgent, whispered, "You need to get out. Now." I swallowed hard. "Who the hell is this?" A pause. Then, "Run." A deep, guttural growl filled the store. I dropped the phone and turned in time to see the boy's face begin to change. His mouth stretched too wide, his teeth, too many of them, glinting under the flickering fluorescent lights. His skin seemed to ripple, shifting, like something underneath was pressing to get out. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted for the back room, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands fumbled for the lock. The doorknob rattled almost immediately, and a childlike giggle echoed through the thin door. Then silence. I pressed my ear against the door, my breath shallow. Nothing. Cautiously, I cracked it open. The store was empty. The boy was gone. I crept forward, my pulse still hammering. The gas station looked exactly as it had before, aisles undisturbed, the payphones still off the hook. The only thing different was the air. It felt wrong. Thick, heavy, charged with something unseen. I took a shaky breath and reached for the payphone, lifting it back to my ear. The line was dead. A single whisper crackled through the static. "See you soon." I quit the night shift after that. No one believed me when I told them what happened. They said it was just exhaustion, an overactive imagination. But a week later, I saw a story in the local paper. A family traveling through Route 85 had gone missing. Their car was found abandoned on the side of the road, doors open, no signs of struggle. The only thing left inside was a single, dirty white t-shirt. And on the gas station security footage from that night, just before the cameras cut to static, there was a single frame of the little boy, smiling at the camera.
Evil children on the midnight prowl, highways calling, let's race somehow. Stars above, but the dark is deep. Angels weeping while devils creep. Lights flicker as we race the night. Shadows whisper in the pale moonlight. Laughter echoes like a twisted dream, breaking rules on a madman's scheme. On the highway running wild and free, evil children come and dance with me. Midnight's magic twisting fate's decree. On the edge where no one wants to see. Cars like monsters in a speed parade, neon ghosts in a wild charade. Chaos reigns where the sane once tread. Every curve's a tale of blood and dread. In the darkness there's a siren's wail. Evil children know it's time to bail. On the run till the morning.